So with the bikes, I think it's fairly well documented that GT85 is used pretty much everywhere. We're big fans of GT85 on bikes. I think I've been riding now quite seriously for a good 20 years, which is slightly worrying. However, the main time that you would use GT85 is when you've just cleaned the bike. So you've hosed the bike down, everything's been cleaned off and degreased. Then you need to go about a certain amount of maintenance to keep everything running smoothly. Bikes are expensive components, and to keep them all working without having to replace everything every single time you ride and cover it in mud, good English mud, is well worth doing. And so we start by using it as a water dispersant in all of the bolts, any area that has bolts or pivots, brake pivots. It's also squirted actually into the gear shifter housings to ensure that all the water's dispersed, that there's not going to be any seizing up in there once the water, if the water stays there. You don't want any sitting water anywhere at all. We'd use it on the seat posts, seat clamps. We'd also use it on pedal axles and axle bolts, and also on pedal pins if you're using flat pedals. If you're using a version such as these, SPD pedals, clipless pedals, you would use it on the springs and the cleat retention mechanisms. We also use GT85 in all of the cable housings to ensure that any open cables have water dispersed and there's no sitting water within the cable housings themselves. This will also prevent any corrosion build-up and clean out any old grease that's become caked with mud and dust and all the other things that get in there with mountain biking in particular. Obviously on the derailleurs there's a great number of pivots that need to be lubricated and cleaned after a washover with a standard detergent. Likewise on the rear derailleurs, and within the cable housings, within the pivots, within the adjustment screws, the retention springs, jockey wheels as well. Although with the jockey wheels you need to keep the GT85 to the bolts, because it's an extremely good cleaner and will unwittingly clean out the grease that you actually want in there. Okay. But on the chain as well, the chain's always the main culprit of any issues on your bike, because it goes through so much during a race, a ride. The movement between every single one of these links is usually about 114 links on a chain, maybe 112 links on a chain. If you've taken a couple out, if you don't keep them clean and lubricated with something light like a GT85, they won't last very long at all. Okay. We would often follow up with a wax-based chain lube to ensure that there's a load-bearing lube being used on there as well, but not without hitting it with GT85 first to ensure everything's cleaned and done. Further to the basic day-to-day maintenance of the bike, when you're carrying out more in-depth maintenance, sort of monthly maintenance or even biannual maintenance, when you're actually stripping bearings down on complex suspension systems. Bearings are typically rubber sealed bearings across bike ranges, and bushings also do get used, but with rubber sealed bearings, if you want to keep them running for quite a long time, you want to negate any play, which usually occurs as a result of build-up of dirt actually getting past the seals. You'll remove the bearings from the frame and clean those out. GT85 is absolutely perfect for this. If we go through and look at an old bearing, so the bearing itself is sealed with a rubber seal. If you use a craft knife or a Stanley knife to get underneath the seal, you can then pick the seal up, move the seal away, you can see how much build-up you get.
Absolutely, look at that.
Yeah, so we would clear this with GT85 and a cloth initially, and you're also now revealing the caged bearing race itself actually within the bearing. So you need to remove all of the grease and dirt, the old grease and the dirt from these bearings and cage assemblies, because obviously once that gets in there it acts like a grinding paste, and that's exactly the way you end up with fore and aft play in the bearing housing. So once you've actually flushed this out with GT85, it's a great way of ensuring that You don't use a corrosive cleaner in there. You don't end up with a detergent, a degreaser, forming in pockets in any of the lips or seals that are within the bearing. You can then re-grease afterwards, and you haven't done anything any harm. So yeah, GT85 is an ideal material for that, and it also prevents corrosion on the bearing faces too. So.
And this is a technique you've been using for a while, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Always. Bike frames now, which can be destroyed if your bearings aren't constantly looked at. Bike frames can cost you £2,000. They're very expensive components, so keeping absolutely everything working the way you want it to is paramount. So.
Wonderful.
It's good stuff.
Thanks ever so much.
Pleasure.